And we're on. So we've just started the free live Q&A with Jen Lewis of Beauty and Blood, and the Blood Cycle Conference 2016 is hosting. So she's going to tell us a little bit about her process as an artist and how she got started doing some menstrual art. And then everyone will be welcome to ask their questions in the Q&A. So why don't you get started?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Lana. I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about the art project. So Beauty and Blood is a macro photography project I started back in 2013. I started using the Diva Cup after having a bad incident with a tampon. And while I was actually emptying the cup, I started to notice the patterns and the different colors and textures in the water of the toilet bowl. And it got me really interested, which I know sounds very bizarre to people, but at the time I was working in a research laboratory. So I was surrounded with a lot of visual imagery of blood fractions, blood cells, various parts of the anatomy. And my background is in art history. So I'm familiar with, Damien Hirst and Chris O'Feely and people who are working with other abject materials. And so the use of menstrual blood as art didn't really seem very strange to me. And so as I was emptying the cup, I started to have this idea, is there a way to capture what I'm seeing? Because I was really taken by the abstract qualities of the blood. And with, the rise of smartphones and everything, I was like, oh, can I get this with my little, iPhone or whatever? And I came home and asked my husband, who's a photographer, said, I have this idea, like I'm seeing these really cool patterns and color, interactions and all of this awesome motion in the water. Is there a way we can capture it and share it with other people? I had this other, simultaneously, a little feminist awakening when I'd had some of the blood on my fingers. And I know that's a big issue for women or menstruators who are thinking about switching over to the menstrual cup from tampons. There's this big fear about the blood. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, why are we so grossed out by menstrual blood? We see blood all over pop culture. The most popular sports are, bloody and violent, and a lot of television. I always go to Dexter. That series is just riddled with blood, and that doesn't seem to bother people. But as soon as it's, menstruation, all bets are off. Everyone's horrified. Like, it's just terrible. And as women, we're sort of, I think, socialized to feel that way as well. And so I had the blood on my hands and was just like, this just is not that gross. Like, I don't understand why people are so grossed out by it. So I wanted to pair that moment of questioning with what I was seeing visually. And is there a way to use the visual image to spark some type of a, feminist awakening, or to relieve that tension for other menstruators? And luckily my husband, he got to work problem solving, and he was sort of taken with the idea as well. And he had a macro lens at the house. And so we set up some construction lights in our bathroom to light up the toilet bowl. And when we first started creating the work, it was in the bathroom over the toilet bowl. Eventually, we sort of grew out of that and moved into a small aquarium where he would set up the camera in front of the aquarium, and I would pour and sort of design in the water from above. And so that was the whole sort of birth of the art project, and what got me interested in menstruation and the menstrual cycle, and how we regard it socially, and what those implications are internationally.
Okay, great. So what have been some of your hurdles when you're trying to exhibit your
Oh,
artwork at
you're
galleries?
breaking up on me. Can you repeat that?
What are some of your hurdles as you're trying to exhibit your artwork at galleries?
I think one of the biggest hurdles is not having maybe sponsorship or a really defined in with the art world. It's very insular, it's very small, and not being a traditional artist who paints or has another medium to rely on, I sort of jumped in, right from the ground. And my strategy for having the work exhibited revolved around bioart specifically, and any galleries or venues that were interested in looking at different parts of the human body and anatomy, or galleries and curators who are specifically looking for feminist commentary or women's exhibits. So I would say 95% of the shows that I've been in since 2013 have revolved around women's issues or social justice.
Right, okay. I remember reading somewhere though that you had to put a paper on a door that said caution, like there are photos of menstrual blood. Is that
Yes.
right? Yeah.
So last June, I actually curated a international art exhibit for the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research. They had a joint conference with the Women's Health and Human Rights Center in Boston at Suffolk University. And the university was very good to us. They gave me a lot of space to show the art, but it was a very conservative institution, and they did not want any of their students or faculty or other professional visitors being surprised by anything that they saw. So even though we were in classrooms that had closed doors, they asked me to put construction paper over the window. And this made a lot of people very edgy and very angry. And so we put up this sort of tongue-in-cheek sign
Mm.
that said, caution, contemporary art may cause you to feel uncomfortable or question your beliefs or something like that, which I happen to believe is a very important part of contemporary art. I think it's a lot more important to challenge people and their beliefs and what's going on socially, politically, than it is to make something that's just pretty. There's a lot of beauty in the world that's very representational. It's very easy to digest. And I think things like Beauty and Blood and some other bio art, they show things that we normally don't think of as beautiful that do have actual aesthetic value. And so that was what had happened. Was it was part of a menstrual conference, but the institution that was housing us was a little leery.
Ah, okay, okay, that's interesting. I mean, part of what I'm interested in is kind of bridging the gap between those that are already in the menstrual activism and even feminist community, and those who aren't yet, for whatever reason, right? So,
Yeah.
one example is that I've been using the monthly curse hashtag because I'm trying to reach those who are feeling their their periods are monthly curses right now. So do you have any plans to kind of reach the broader public, so to kind of get that image of, or to start questioning that idea of menstruation as dirty and gross at all?
Yeah, I had some pretty good luck with some of the media that picked up the Beauty and Blood last year, with them sort of working with me to reframe it, because I'm also interested in that angle that you mentioned. I think it's very important to sort of go beyond those of us who are already in the sphere. And, the preaching to the choir gets old, and, there are a lot more people who need to be engaged. And, um, I've had some really interesting contact from people, on social media who have reached out and been like, this completely changed the way I view my period. I had a trans person reach out to me and was just like, wow, I've always felt so much shame and, really hated my body for what it was doing. And, this is such an interesting perspective. And so it was very organic on social media, and then with the help of mainstream media and some of the articles that went out, I was able to reach more people in the mainstream. And, just in my own personal circle, I feel like I talk to a lot of people who this is definitely, not their segment of activism. And so, I'm having those conversations with people one-on-one, and it's been possible to reach them in the gallery shows as well. A lot of people aren't expecting to see something like that. And so I feel like I've had some moderate success on the one-on-one basis.
Right. Okay. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So another question I had was, do you do this kind of artwork? Like, do you practice this art every single period?
I'm not right now. When I first started, I was doing it on a monthly basis, and all of the photo shoots were sort of live. So I would actually remove the cup, and then my husband would come in and set up the camera and the construction lights in the bathroom, or if we were shooting in the aquarium, he would get all of that ready. And so I was actually working with like fresh, warm blood or, menstrual fluid. And we had an incident with the camera where it got dropped. And so we were out of commission for a few months. And during that period, I was actually saving it. And so I had like a little jar that I could keep it in the refrigerator. So it stayed, it was able to retain its color and not oxidize. And that ended up being a really nice blessing in disguise, because I started keeping it into like a small travel shampoo bottle. And it ended up becoming a new tool for actually pouring the blood. And it separates, because I feel like the way we're conditioned to think about menstrual blood is that it's just blood. And it's not. There's really, I think that's sort of like the smallest part of what makes up menstrual fluid is the blood. There's all the tissue and everything, and there's mucus, there's all of this other material that's in there. And so by letting it sit, we were able to start seeing different parts of the fluid in the water. And so when we weren't doing it sort of live on a monthly basis, we ended up having some really nice discoveries. And so right now I've gone back to work doing like a full-time day job. So I haven't been creating anything new. I really wanted to start working with other menstruators. And my big vision when I first started was I wanted to do something more comparative, something based on age, race, and gender, these things that we see outside, and how does that translate to menstruation, if at all? Talking to older women who are, perimenopausal, they'll say, how much their flow picks up, or, how it changes color or the texture. And I think, for menstruators who use a cup and who actually look at what their body's producing on a monthly basis, we know that the first day of our cycle looks totally different from the last day of our cycle. And so I wanted to sort of grow the project into looking at that. So that might be the next phase.
Right. Okay. That's great. That's great. So do you have any photos that kind of highlight the difference between, like you said that the fluid kind of separates? Do you have any actual photos that kind of show that?
Oh, not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I will go and look through my inventory and see if I can get you some. I do. There's one called Ripple, and it's from 2014. I want to say it was like the June or July. Like if you actually go into my website, beautyandblood.com, there's an archive gallery, and that's broken up by months from what the first year that we were making the art. And that one is a great photo because you can actually see like light pink tissue, and there's a whole lot of texture in that. So that I think is a great example.
Right. Okay. I think actually I see it maybe in June and May 2013. I'm just looking here.
Yeah, it's got a black background, I know for
Right.
sure.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. That's so interesting. Okay. Can you maybe also tell us more about like some of your favorite menstrual products and that kind of thing?
Sure. So I'll start by saying I always hated tampons. I was always a very reluctant tampon user. And my physician mentioned getting a cup one day. And so when I made the transition to the menstrual cup, that just sort of blew my mind and took over my entire menstrual management. I don't even bother with pads or panty liners or anything anymore. I just use the cup exclusively. And so I have a few different cups that I really like. I have my tried and true Diva cup, and then Lunette cup. They make a great product, and I think I prefer the way they do their ad campaigns and who they support, and just the different small artists that they support. They had a huge menstrual hygiene day event in Finland last year,
Mm.
and I was the solo artist for that, which was really cool. And then this past summer in Boston for the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research Conference, they hosted the Crimson Wave. They did a comedy hour. And so I really, really like the way Lunette is supporting other menstruators and trying to be a little bit more radical and forward with their own reach. I haven't used any of the reusable pads yet, and I haven't used any of the panties yet either. Those are high on my list of things to get. And so, yeah, I'm just a really big fan of the cup.
Yeah, I have to
Yeah.
say, me too. I got the Diva cup as well, and I've been loving it. It's and you know, the more people that I speak to, the more I hear a common theme, and it's that you're building a more intimate relationship with your cycle. Like now, you actually know how much blood you're kind of shedding, right, and things like
Right.
that.
Well, and it always cracks me up. You see people and they're like, I must be bleeding, like liters of blood every month. And it's so minimal. And it's just because, the disposable products, the way they suck it in and they sort of push it out of sight, you really do lose track of, what's going on. And I will say, I tried the soft cup. I don't know if you've used that. It looks more like a disc. I guess it's a little bit more diaphragm-esque. That took me a little while to sort of work up my courage for it because I just couldn't quite wrap my mind around how it was going to work. And that is incredibly comfortable and effective as well. And you can have sex with it. So that
Oh,
may be
okay.
of interest to some people. And then it's the same thing with the sea sponge. Um,
Ah, okay. I didn't
that
realize
wasn't
that.
my favorite product, but I know people who use it and love it. And I've heard that that tends to be what porn actresses use when they're on their cycle and
Ah,
shooting,
okay.
because you can also have sex with that. So
Right,
yeah.
right. Interesting, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be so great. We were talking earlier when I first started mentioning having you at the conference about maybe actually having like a workshop where people could actually kind of do some of this artwork themselves.
Sure.
Um, if we couldn't do that, I think at the very least it would be excellent if we could at least have a demonstration with you doing it, maybe even like an aquarium set up in the room if we could manage that, and then have you do your thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I would be happy to bring all my tools.
have you? Oh, great, great. Have you made any progress in terms of figuring out how to make like a menstrual fluid substitute?
I think red acrylic paint would work. And I also think maybe a little cornstarch, maybe with some red dye, that might be comparable. We might get lucky. Maybe I'll be menstruating while I'm there.
Yeah, I was thinking that might we might have the whatever in
Yeah,
our favor
I'll have to
for
consult
that.
my clue and see what the projection is on that.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I think those are two things that would work. And the big thing that makes all the difference in the photos is the aquarium isn't just tap water. It's actually a mix of salt water and tap water. And so the salt changes the density, which is what allows the blood to slow down. And that's how we're able to capture those really interesting images. And so it almost freezes the blood.
Ah, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's almost like adding some buoyancy in there.
Yes. And one of the things that I noticed was really cool is just sort of having somebody walking around in the room while we're doing it. changes how the water moves. And so that will cause like motion and vibrations. And so depending on what part of the menstrual fluid is actually in the tank, it'll either separate really fast or, it'll cause it to swirl and go in circles. And I saw that you used A Star Is Born for a lot of the press or the PR for this. And that's how that came about. It was a thinner part of the menstrual fluid, and so as motion was going, it just caused it all to dissipate in the water. So
Wow, wow, that's really
yeah,
neat.
we'll have to try some salt water and maybe a little acrylic paint and some cornstarch. I'll start playing with that.
Right, right. Oh, so interesting.
Yeah.
Another question I had was, well, if you had one thing to say to maybe young menstruators, maybe people who've just gotten their period, what would you say to them?
I think it's really important to acknowledge sort of what you've been socialized to believe about your body and, honor that, but then consciously be radical and push it away, because so much of what we're taught is based out of fear and shame and just sort of a general ignorance. And there's so much power in knowing your own body and being comfortable with your body. And, even if you don't want to use a cup or a tampon. I know for younger people, it's really disconcerting, the idea of putting something like that in your body. Do your research about, just different products, and don't necessarily take what your mom or your grandma or the school tells you at face value. There's so much great information out there now about the toxins that are in those products, and they're really good alternatives that may have a more expensive startup cost, but they're worth it in the long run. And I mean, the cup, what you were saying about how much more it puts you in touch with your body, there's just so much value in that. Um, you know, I I feel like it makes me think of all the talks about masturbation and pleasure and, just sort of be in charge of your own body, and feel okay about it, which I know is easier said than done when you're like 12 or 13. But, like look around for the radical women that you look up to and what they do and how they choose to use their body and what they put in it or don't put in it. And, you know, really think about it. I mean, it took me, I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I was like, I hate tampons and I don't want to do this, you know? And
Yeah, yeah.
I just feel
It's
like,
often out of being frustrated with other options that we kind of finally come to something that works for us, right?
yes, absolutely.
So I have two more questions.
Okay.
My one question is, do you have a favorite photograph of yours?
A favorite photograph of mine.
Or
I
even
really
just a
like,
handful?
yeah, I really like the newer pieces that we did. So the 2015 works that went out that are on the main page, I really like Bursting Through, which to me looks like a big heart. Um, a lot of people keep telling me it looks like a butt or breast, which I've never seen in it before, but like to me it just looks like this big, representational sort of comic-y heart coming through the fluid. But a couple people who also enjoy that piece, they've mentioned that they're like, it looks like a butt or it looks like boobs. I really like that one, and I really like the Crimson Wave too. I feel like that's a really solid piece of macro photography where you can see I like how it looks like the blood is actually washing over something and coming down in a wave, and it feels just like a really nice solid piece.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw those two. They're great.
they're fun.
Um, so my last question is, why do you think it's important to have a conference like the Blood Cycle Conference?
I think it's really important to, draw people's attention to it. There's still so many people who are like, why do these feminists have to talk about their body? And it's like, because of that, there's so many people trying to control our dialogue and how we want our bodies to be portrayed and respected. And I think, understanding the menstrual cycle and all of the negative history and all the stigma and all the shame that surround that, and then how it branches out and touches all of these other parts of life and where those restrictions are for women and menstruators. I think it's crucial that we have this conversation and, really frame it up in the political context and the fact that it's not just about, a bunch of touchy-feely woo-woo, new age BS. I'm a big fan of the woo-woo stuff, but there's so much more to it. I feel like I had no idea how nuanced the discussion was until I started doing this artwork. And personally, I wasn't a very active or brash, loud feminist activist at all until I started doing this. And, once I started realizing all of these different things, I mean, just like the hormonal birth control and the fact that we're all raised to think that that's actually a period. It's not. And
Definitely.
then, I can't remember if it was on a post that you made or if it was someplace else, but I know when I was on Depo-Provera in college, it was the best thing ever because I didn't have a period. And now I have osteopenia at 36, and it's like, there's just so much taken away from us because we don't know our bodies and we're not encouraged to know our bodies. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that a blood cycle conference can do for all menstruators, whether they're women or trans women, not, that may not be the best language, but whether you're women born or not, there's a lot of discussion and dialogue to be had there. And that makes me think of one of the pieces that was in the show in Boston. There was a genderqueer person who had a lot of anxiety around their menstrual cycle. And whenever they tried to get mental health help about it, they couldn't bridge that gap. And so the mental health providers just didn't have any of the support or the dialogue to help this person. And their artwork, by coming to the conference, opened that dialogue for so many people who are in the menstruation industry. And I think that's, one of the things the Blood Cycle Conference can do.
Yeah, that's great. I think we're actually hoping to have some maybe some non-binary speakers at the event, just to speak to that experience and kind of raise that awareness. So I'm glad you spoke to that.
Yeah, I've had a couple very awesome interactions with people along those lines. And it's just like, oh my God, like our thinking is just so narrow and sort of how we think about the menstrual cycle, and it affects so many people. And I feel like that's what these conferences are, is they're breaking it open, they're giving new avenues for those dialogues, and hopefully encouraging, more mainstream media and more mainstream people to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things is that menstruator isn't even a word officially right now, and that's just showing how lacking our language is for dealing with these issues.
Yeah, I can't tell you how long it took me to get my iPhone trained just to spell menstruation correctly or menstruate correctly. I mean, it's still not on board with menstruator. It's always trying to autocorrect that to something, but yeah.
Great. Well, this has been a wonderful kind of Q&A. I'm just going to stop the broadcast, but first I'm going to invite whoever might be kind of tuning in with us to check out our Kickstarter, where we have 3 weeks left to raise $23,000 for the conference. We're just covering basic costs like speakers fees and venue rentals. So please check out our Kickstarter. I'll post it in the description below. Thank you so much, Jen, for joining us.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.